Wonderful. All right, so as I said, this is the treatment modalities transplant and home best practice call. For today's agenda, we're going to go over some meeting reminders. For the transplant project, we are going to be showing you the facility report cards, how to use them. There's been a lot of questions on how to use them and how to read them accurately. So we're going to walk through step by step how to do that. We do have a guest speaker for transplant. We're going to go over some home topics. We have a guest speaker for home as well, and then some closing remarks and time to answer any questions that you all may have. For some reminders, we've done this for you, but if for some reason your line becomes unmuted, please mute your line when you're not speaking to avoid background noise and extra talking. Be present and engaged. Participants are encouraged to utilize the chat to ask any questions and make comments. Please send it to everybody. And then all meeting materials are available, will be available in IPRO Learn after the call is completed. We have some objectives on the slides for you today. You're going to understand the current treatment modality objectives and key results, identify at least one best practice in the area of home or transplant that you can implement at your facility, understand the depth of a pro-transplant culture at your facility and how it can affect success, and identify barriers related to health and equity for patients in home modalities. Okay, so we're going to start. I'm going to take you through the facility report cards for waitlist and transplant. This was very important for us to discuss on this call. It is a best practice to utilize them for the facilities that do utilize these. They've seen a lot of great success and they fully understand their role in the CMS ESRD goals. So first, who gets this report? So I have highlighted here the information that tells you who receives the report. A lot of questions come in about what facility is this report for? Do I need to send this to other people that I work with? These two sections will tell you, they're highlighted here in red. This report is sent to almost everybody. The facility data EQRS contact, the head nurse that we have on file, the facility administrator, the transplant lead, the medical director, the regional quality manager gets a copy, and then we also have the home program manager and the social worker. So a lot of individuals at your center are getting these report cards. If you don't receive these, there is a way to troubleshoot it. You'll need to update your facility contact information. We only send these reports to people that we have contacts for. And so one barrier might be we don't have your updated contact information. So we are going to put a link for our contact database in the chat. And then whenever you go in, whenever you log in, make sure there's no typos when you're entering your contact information. You can also put a help desk ticket in, which we will also share the link to that throughout this call. So what's in the report? So for the transplant and waitlisting report, the section highlighted in red explains how your facility goals are calculated and where the data comes from. The waitlist data is directly from UNOS, and it reflects any new waitlisted patients from May 1st of 2022 until the month before you receive the report. And I gave an example at the bottom, and I'll talk through that. The transplant data comes from EQRS admits into transplant centers. Again, it's from May 1st, 2022 until the month before you receive the report. So a lot of facilities will reach out and say, you know, our records don't match this report. And the first question is the report accurate? The data comes directly from UNOS and EQRS. And so we have on the next slide ways that you can mitigate the possible errors and how you can approach the transplant center to fix the problems. So an example of the timeline, when you receive this month's report, so February's report, it will be May 1st, 2022 until January, just so there's an idea of what the data windows are on the report. So why are these our goals? The section highlighted here shows you what the goals are. And the goals are set by us. They're set by the network. These goals indicate what your facility should be achieving based on your past performance. And we call your past performance your baseline. So you'll see that word here on the report, it says baseline. That's what we call it, what your past performance is based on. We keep track of what you have completed and how many more you'll need to get, so you don't have to. So these reports are to make your job easier in tracking what has been reported for waitlist and transplant for your facility. Your facility's success and the goals put your network in a very favorable position to meet the overall CMS ESRD annual goals for waitlist and transplant. The network uses this data also to find high and low performers. So how should you use the report? At the bottom of the report, we have a section, it's highlighted here in red, where we provide the CCN number again, what the transplant measure is. So is it transplant or waitlist? We put the event date, so what date they got transplanted or what date they got waitlisted, and then the patient's UPI number. So we give UPI numbers because it's a way that we can send the report without giving up any PHI and being HIPAA compliant. The UPIs are provided for your quick reference. So what you should do when you get the report, if you're curious which patient we're referring to, look up that patient in EQRS using the UPI that we provided. If you notice there's a discrepancy, your first step is to contact the transplant center. When you talk to them, ensure the patients were inputted into UNOS for waitlist, ensure that the patients were admitted into EQRS for transplant. If there's another issue, which obviously there can be other issues, we can help you sort through those, but this should be your first step, because contacting the transplant center and ensuring the patient was documented is typically the one action that can overcome the discrepancy. That's the number one reason why the patient is not showing up on the report. After the report comes into your inbox, we send it via email. We want you to share it with your interdisciplinary team during QAPI meetings and discuss your facility's progress with the CMS goals. If you're not meeting your goals, it's time to do that root cause analysis and identify areas that you can improve upon. All right, so my section is done. I do have a slide up here to kind of give a little teaser for the next portion of the transplant project. We do have a best practice facility joining us today, US Renal Care Orange. This is the facility that we're going to highlight this round for best practice. They're located in Orange, Connecticut. Their census is 143, and you can see down in the box that I've provided since May of 2022 until December, which was roughly 6 months, they've waitlisted 11 patients and transplanted 10. So they've done like very, very outstanding for this goal area, and we wanted to bring them on today so they could share with you all what their practices are that makes them so successful. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Dawn Lawler works at US Renal Care Orange, and she's a kidney care options educator. So Dawn, if you can unmute.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my camera is not working today. I've been working with IT and it's just not going to work, so I apologize. Thank you so much for having me on the call, Caroline. I'm really honored and appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone today about transplant listing and, you know, obviously how important it is to our patients that are currently on dialysis and also the CKD patients who are in stage 4 or 5 and getting towards dialysis. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about both of those patient populations.
Wonderful. And let me know when you want to switch to the next slide and I will control that for you.
Great. Thank you. So just a little bit of the agenda today are, I appreciate that, secrets to success. A little bit about the culture in Orange, our educational approach, including the importance of health literacy, patient-to-patient support and patient advocacy, and then our communication with our 2 transplant centers, and also our practices of re-referral. Next slide, please. So our culture in Orange is the first thing I really want to talk about. As far as myself, I was originally in Orange a home nurse So I did PD and home hemo, and also did the transplant back then for the clinic also. But my new role, which I've been in for about 2 years, going on 3 now, is a kidney care options educator for U.S. Renal Care. And this is a new role for U.S. Renal Care, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the first KCO educators. In the last couple of years, it's proven to be very, very successful, as currently 58% of the patients that are educated by a KCO educator at US Renal end up on home modalities, which is just a wonderful number to be working with for home also. There's about 20 of us now across the organization. And as we continue our success, the company is planning on extending that to more educators throughout the United States. The other part of my role is as a patient liaison. So whether it's pertaining to an insert patient who wants to transition to home or educating a patient on transplant, I am normally the go-to person for the staff in Orange. I normally educate CKD stage 4 to 5, depending on when the referral is made. And at that time, I go over all of the modality options available to the patients, including transplant, and hopefully are working at that point once the patient has reached a GFR of 20 or below, to get that person to the transplant center and start the evaluation process at that point. So that hopefully we can get them listed and get the testing completed before they even have to start dialysis. Next slide, please. So I do modality education on all the new in-center HD patients. So this gives me an opportunity to learn a little bit about them, what modalities they're interested in, make sure that they're educated, and also see if they meet the criteria for referral to transplant, and make sure that I get that process going. I work with home and in-center patients to refer and support throughout the transplant journey. Okay, so we all know it's not just a referral and then we just let the patient go. I think that was more the philosophy in the past, whereas the transplant centers were looking more towards a patient who was motivated to get their testing done and just to see how the patient was feeling about transplant. But as I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, what we found in Orange is that some of the reason that the patients don't carry through as far as the testing portion of the evaluation is because a lot of times they really don't understand the test that they're being asked to do, and many of them are fearful. So it's important to have that designated person to follow the transplant candidates even after you have referred them, okay? So we can go to the next slide, just so I can start on this. So this is our kind of our culture. We all have the same philosophy about how we want the patients to feel when coming to dialysis. A team that's working together with a real patient focus. That's where the patients get the best care. So we want to let the patient know that now that they're there with us, and even though they're in center and may transition to home and hopefully eventually go to transplant, we're there to make sure that we're fulfilling what they need and what they want. And we're trying to do it in the way that they best understand, and that the best that they can be proactive in their transplant journey. Next slide. So this is actually a slide that Caroline came up with that I thought was fantastic, because as I looked at it, we see it's kind of like in a big cloud. And I think that sometimes that's the way patients feel when you talk to them about dialysis modalities and about transplant, is that they kind of have a little bit of an idea, but it's very cloudy and it's hazy. And there's many, many aspects of it, as we see in this cloud, that they have to think about, and also maybe them thinking about how people are looking at them and maybe judging them. So as I look at this slide, I see things like colonoscopy, pap smear, echocardiogram, your prostate. There's just those words. I mean, we're acquainted with them because we're in the medical field, but if you really think about if you were on the patient side, even with the education that you have, a lot of these things they've either never heard of or they've heard of them, but they really have no idea what they are and what's involved in the testing at all. So I think that this is where the health literacy really comes into play. And speaking to everyone, no matter if they have a college degree, they never went to high school, even if they're in the medical field, it's still very important to talk to patients in the simplest terms possible so that we can make sure that they're understanding exactly what's involved. Okay, so maybe someone's heard of a colonoscopy, but they don't know why they have to have it for transplant. Some people don't even understand why, if they have an active cancer, that, you know, denies them the right at that time to have a transplant. Many of them don't understand what immunosuppressant medication means and how that actually makes their body unable to fight. So if you're someone with cancer and you have a kidney transplant and you're put on these immunosuppressant medications, that cancer is just going to start growing like wildfire. So a lot of these things really have to be explained to the patient in very simple terms, and, you know, having the conversation more than once. As we know that, I think it's something like only 20% of the conversation is really heard when you're having these health conversations with people. So staying with them through the process, and each test that's required or each test that's coming up that they're having, it's important to talk to them about it. You know, for a colonoscopy, they're going to have a prep, they're going to have to do things of this nature, just to alleviate some of the stress of it and to know that someone is there with them through the process. Next slide. So our best practices, first and foremost, is the communication portion of it and the rapport that the center has with the patient. Okay, so as far as transplant, we're not a transplant center, we're a dialysis center. So that's where our expertise lie. So if a patient is interested in transplant and they may have something that at the present time or even permanently is going to kind of take them out of running for a transplant, we have found that it's always best to let the transplant center deal with that as far as, is that patient eligible? We have the eligibility sheets for both of our transplant centers, Yale and Hartford Hospital, but they really should be the people that explain this to the patient, especially if the patient is really, really dead set on getting a transplant. I would put the referral in most of the time, knowing that the patient doesn't meet eligibility, and I'm communicating with the transplant center coordinator, letting them know that this patient is really someone that they need to talk to so that our care of that person is not affected. As we all know, with in-center patients, our relationship with them is very, very important. And that's why we have found that one of our best practices is letting the transplant center communicate any reasons for ineligibility with our patients. And then we can have a conversation when they come back and we need to talk about that. So it's just been working out much better, and having the patient know that the decision was made by the transplant center, not the dialysis center. And then we can do what we can for them. And sometimes that is having the patient maybe transition to a home modality at that point, if a transplant is not something that's right down the road. we can help them to improve their life and have a better quality of life like they would if they had a transplant. Next slide. So as far as the communication, many reasons for the patients to stop in the referral process to the waitlist process. So we kind of touched on this before. So we want to make sure that we're working with the patient to address the issues, okay? And that before re-referring, we need to open lines of communication with the transplant center. So first, if we find that we refer a person and then we check back on them and we know that they have testing that's been ordered by the transplant center and the patient is not going, we want to make sure that we go back to that patient and have a conversation why those tests are not being done. Do they not have a PCP to help schedule them? Do they not understand what the tests are, so they didn't follow through with some of the tests that were already scheduled by the transplant center? So we want to know why the process isn't happening. Is it a family problem at home that at this point it's not appropriate for them to be, completing their eval? And if they can't, then we want to we want to call the transplant center and we want to say to them, listen, Mr. Jones is, going through a divorce. Mr. Jones has had some health challenges, family challenges, challenges at work, whatever they are, and say at that point, can we close the evaluation and can we re-refer when the patient is ready? And I think the reason that's so important is that you don't want to scar the reputation for the patient with the transplant center and them thinking, oh, this person really isn't serious about a transplant. And then you're re-referring and they have no idea why. Part of our role really, is and should be being an advocate for the patient. And if they're having difficulty doing this, it's good to step in and just say, listen, I can get in touch with the coordinator, let her know you're having some challenges, and then we'll stay in communication. And when you're ready, we can re-refer you to the transplant center when it's a better time. All right. So it's the same thing when you're dealing with maybe a BMI that's too high. You want to make sure that you're touching base with that patient and you're getting them all the resources they need, such as working with the dietitian. Let the dietitian know that BMI is holding them from transplant at the moment, and see if there's anything that she can do to help, or maybe get some other resources involved. I know that we have a great thing with Hartford Transplant where they actually have 3 categories of listing with BMI. So at a very high BMI, they would tell you, to work with the patient in the dialysis center. At another BMI, their dietitian will work with the patient, even though they're not formally being evaluated. It would just be a dietary referral. And then they can be listed at 1 BMI inactive and then actually activated once they reach the BMI criteria. So this is important in that this really lets the patient know that we really want them to be transplanted, and we're going to do everything we can to help them in their weight loss journey so that they can make it to transplant. So these relationships and the dialysis center kind of being a liaison between the patient and the coordinator at transplant has really helped us get our transplant patients listed and then for them actually to go to transplant. Next slide. So the other thing that we've kind of isolated that really helps is the use of transplant advocates or the patient-to-patient support. So we actually have patients who are on the waiting list and patients who have been transplanted in the past, and we partner them up either through a phone call, an anonymous phone call, or a face-to-face interaction to help these patients talk to people who have been through the process, to help them share their experiences, maybe to, number one, educate them, and to decrease some of the anxiety that's associated with transplant. And we usually have lobby days. And also we try to do, we've had in the past what's called a patient mixer, where we've brought in transplant patients and home patients to speak to in-center patients who are going through the process, and actually just have a face-to-face in sort of a social situation. So it's more light. It's an easier way for patients to talk to each other. So they get a realistic scenario and feedback from talking to the patient. So have you had problems with your medication? What are some of the side effects? So basically it gives the patient a real life picture. And also the advocates, some of them have been transplanted more than once. So they also can let the patient know that no one transplant is the same as another. Every transplant is its own experience with a lot of different factors that are involved in that. So where it's advice, it's nothing that's actually in stone. And we make sure to let the patients know that this is just one patient's experience. Next slide. So these are the key points. Basically, transplant liaisons are key, because if someone drops the ball, it can be devastating to the patient. And it is, we're all human in every discipline, and sometimes people can fall through the cracks. In Orange, I'm so proud to say that the culture that we've built there is that every part of the team, from the social worker to the dietitian to the nurses to the techs to the managers, basically to everyone who's working there that touches a patient in any way, is and realizes that they are such an important part of getting these patients to transplant or a home modality, whatever is in their best interest. So we're really all liaisons in our clinic, and everyone really does feel that way. We just had a nurse that read a chart, a home nurse, and realized that the transplant center, something had fallen through, and our patient was waiting and waiting and waiting for listing. And thanks to Gretchen, she caught it, and now the woman is listed. So that's why it really does take a team to do this. Success in CKD education has been great, because many of our patients now arriving to dialysis are either already listed or are in the process of evaluation. And the key with that is that before the patient really has to deal with and take on everything involved in dialysis, the transplant part of it is already done. So it relieves the anxiety, and the patient knows that I'm already working on transplant, which is my ultimate goal. Identify any barriers and make it your mission to overcome them. That's very important, whether it's family support, living arrangements, health literacy, transportation. It could be a million things. We all do something different, and we can all play a role in that. Communicate early and often, and re-refer with the help of the transplant centers. Many patients are very changed and in a different, whether it's psychological or health stage after they've been on dialysis for a while. So you don't want to just present it in the beginning. And if the patient says they're not interested or they may not be a candidate, that doesn't mean that 6 months, a year down the road, that will not change. So you need to keep addressing. And also the patient-to-patient advocacy. So making it a mission to find 1 or 2 patients in your center that would be willing to be an advocate to patients that you need to refer. So any questions are welcome. I really enjoyed speaking with you all.
Thank you so much. As stated at the beginning of the call, we have a lot of attendees. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll give it a couple of minutes before we move on to the home portion, just to see if any questions come in.
Carolyn, I had just a quick question. In terms of tests that people don't understand, like what's the most confused part of what people should, like the patient should focus on getting? What do they often think they're not supposed to, or they don't understand why? Just curious.
I would say there's probably two. One is the colonoscopy. Okay, and that's, needed. Some people aren't aware that over a certain age, they need a colonoscopy, or maybe there's a familial history there. So just explaining to them why they're being screened and that, we obviously know is cancer. And so they're just wanting to make sure that there's nothing there that, that would be found out after transplant, after they're on immunosuppression. And probably the second and the biggest is probably cardiac testing. Um, Many of these patients, at least in our experience, don't have a cardiologist, and many have not seen a cardiologist. So when you're talking about, echocardiograms and EKGs, and then possible, cardiac catheterizations, that's all very complicated. So what I have is a little cheat sheet, and I kind of write the terms down, and then I have a very simple definition next to it. And so when I'm speaking with them, I try to just say it in those terms, because cardiac really is probably the most complicated.
Interesting. And is colonoscopy still the over 50, even if they're in transplant, or is there any like times that they have people go earlier than that because of risk history or anything?
Sometimes for the risk history. So my experience has been if a parent has had colon cancer, they usually want the patient screened sometimes before 50. But other than that, it's usually above 50.
This is excellent information. I love all the full facility approach and how you kind of navigate each patient and stay on top of it and really go above and beyond to get everybody through the process. So really excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I just want to make sure you can still see the slideshow since my screen turned off for a second.
Yep, we're seeing it. And there's
Yeah,
a comment in here that some people that there's a new standard in 2023 that colonoscopy is indicated at age 45. So I hadn't heard that.
Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Caroline. Somebody just shared that from the audience. So
Yeah,
that's
thanks. I didn't know that either.
All right, so I think we're going to pass it on now to Michelle Prager to take over the home modality portion of the call. Thank you so much, Dawn, for joining us. You can stay on and hear about home modality if you'd like. We really appreciate your time.
Thank
And
you
we
so
may have
much.
some questions at the end too. I don't know if others will filter through for Dawn.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay on because I'm eager to hear the rest of it. So I'll be here.
Thank you, Dawn.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michelle, the Quality Improvement Lead for Home Modalities, and I'm going to be talking about the home and telehealth report cards as well as certification letters. Next slide, please. So the home report cards are sent to the following people in the facilities, the same as transplant, the EQRS contact, the head nurse supervisor, administrator, transplant lead, medical director, regional quality manager, home program manager, and social worker. And if you don't receive this report, you can update your facility contact information by clicking the link on the report card or using the link in IPRO Learn as well to update your facility contacts and just make sure everything is spelled and entered correctly. And then if you need any assistance or anything, you can also use the link at the bottom of the report for the help desk ticket. Next slide, please. So what's in the report? The report has the goals for home. So 60% increase in patients starting on home is the 5-year goal, and a 30% increase for transitioning patients to home is the 5-year goal. Goals are determined by your performance from the year 2020. Next slide, please. So why are these our goals? So this slide shows how many patients starting on home and transition to home in the year 2020. So if you look at the box, it has baseline patients added in 2020. It'll show the incident patients are patients started directly on home, and then the transitions are patients that transition to home. So as you can see in this example, 4 patients started directly on home in the year 2020 and 3 transitioned to home. So if you look at the next section, the facility goal is to get 6 starting directly on home and then 6 transitioning to home. And then if you look at the next section, you can see what they have done so far. So the year starts May 1st, 2020. So from May 1st to now, the incident patients starting directly on home, they've had 1 so far. So 5 left for their goal, and then transitions 2 so far with 4 left for their goal. And then you should also keep track of the data on your end as well to kind of compare to this report. And we use this report to find high performers to celebrate success and how they're achieving high numbers and help some of the low performers. Um, so, okay, so what do I do with this section? So this section at the bottom um, has the patient's UPI numbers, and that tells you who we are counting that transition to home. So review this section with your data, discuss this in your IDT and your QAPI meetings, and if you're not meeting your goals, complete an RCA and you can develop an action plan to try to get back on track to meet these goals. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give an example of a certification letter showing a facility that's certified for home. So this is a good example of a facility. This shows in-center hemodialysis certified, in-center peritoneal dialysis certified. They also have HHD certified and PD certified. When you get the certification letter, share this with the network and keep a copy in your binder. And then this is how we track what facilities have home programs. And that's how we would set a facility up for having a home goal. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a facility that no longer has home. So they were once certified for home and then they no longer have home. So we will get help desk tickets for facilities that'll say, we no longer have a home program, but we still have a home goal. We will ask for a certification letter that shows that they're no longer certified for home. This is an example of that letter stating that you're no longer certified for home so that we can take that home goal away. So I wanted to show what that would look like. So please make sure that you share this with your network and that you keep it in a safe place if you're no longer certified for home. Slide, please. So this is the telemedicine report cards, and they are also sent to the same contacts within the facility. If you are not receiving this, you could do the same things, update your facility contacts in Caspio. In IPRO Learn, there's a link for that. Next slide, please. So in this section, it reviews the current telehealth visit count. So in this facility, they had 3. They have 11 patients that are eligible for telehealth visits. So their current rate is 27.27% for telehealth visits. Now, telehealth is for patients that are on a home modality that have a rural zip code. So that's the patients that are counting for telehealth. And we get this data based on claims data. So that is where it is coming from. And then if you look at the bottom, it'll tell you current patient as of and with the date, the patient's UPI number, and then if they're eligible for a telehealth visit or if they had a telehealth visit. And then you can review this list to see who is eligible. And there is a knowledge base reporting treatment setting and EQRS job aid if you need it. The link for it is right at the bottom of this box. It's highlighted in blue. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides are the actual job link, the job aid. I just wanted to have them on the slides just to show you that if you needed to update your patient's status and EQRS, this is the job aid to show you how to do that. Next slide, please. And this is just the end of the job aid. Next slide, please. So next I have my best practice speaker. This is FMC Dayton Regional Dialysis North. And when looking at our December data, which was the most recent data that I had when looking at all of our coalition facilities, FMC Dayton North was number 5 across all 4 networks that IPRO covers, all 13 states, for incident patients starting directly on home. They were number 5. So they have started 28 patients May to December directly on home, and they've had 11 transitions to date since, May through December. Next slide, please. So I have Tracy Green from Dayton North to talk about their best practices. Tracy?
Hello. Can you move it to the next slide? So one of the things I wanted to point out in the beginning, first of all, I love home. All the staff in the Dayton area love home. I think that it's a culture that we have now, from the in-center managers to our director of operations, our area team leads. Everyone's on board with this because it's the best thing for the patients. So Dayton North has a total census of 176. And if you break that down, we're half and half. In-center census is 88. PD and HHD combined is the other 88. So with that, we have taken, I think it might be on another slide, but we decided we needed more home chairs based on everyone being on board with getting this patient's home. So we decertified 8 of our chairs at Dayton North and added 5 treatment chairs. And I think our goal is we will be doing that in all of our clinics based on the needs that we have of sending everybody home. You can turn it to the next slide, please. So some of the things that we do, the physicians do, is they get the CKD education prior to starting. That also starts with the physicians who have now, their culture is that we want patients to go direct to home. In-center is not an option, it's off the table now. With that being said, what they are doing is if a patient crashes into the hospital, they put a temporary CVC line in, they get the patient stable, and then they send them either with a CVC or a PD catheter. They never see in center, they never get used to that, and then they start right back in the home program. We do urgent starts for our PD patients. Again, if they put the catheters in at the hospital, we lay them flat for so many days before we sit them up and start training them. And then again, home is the first modality. And I think as we move forward, you know, even though a lot of this stuff comes from CMS, that they want these people home, well, it's the best thing. And once everybody understands that, everyone's going to want to push all their patients home. We can make anybody able to do home therapy. We just have to think outside the box. We have to be more creative, maybe add more positions in your home departments, adding PCTs, LPNs for the parts that they can do it in it, and then actually start cross-training some of your in-center staff to home, because I think the ultimate goal would be to have these people cross-trained so they can take care of the few people left in center, but help with the majority of the patients that are now at home. You can turn it to the next one. Next slide. So again, our physician champions, they're on board. They understand. It took us a while to get them there, but they're there. We have Next Stage come in and do education with them. We do education with the nurse practitioners. And if you walked in any of the clinics in the Dayton area, they're all going to let you know that home should be first. Patient advocates, we have cards. We have a folder that the people that have to start in center, we have a blue folder that we call welcome, you have dialysis options. And in that folder, when that patient starts on day one, when that paperwork is signed, we let them know right then, the in-center staff let them know, this is temporary. In the folder, you will find a patient advocate phone number. You also have information about PD and HHD. And each time you come in, we're going to just kind of discuss and do more education to decide which modality would work for you and move you into that modality. Our in-center staff, we do education with them about educating the patients on a home modality. We have home therapy ambassadors, which is in each clinic is at least one of the in-center staff members who really guides a lot of that education with the in-center patients. The CMs, they do the education of the in-center patients. We also have a weekly CM call that it's for the in-center managers, but I also get invited so we can discuss any patient that possibly would be a candidate for home. And again, every treatment, we do modality education on that treatment. We also do, you can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, I get so excited when I talk about, it's just so good for these patients. So this is where I talked about we'd be certified. I might have put that in wrong. These certified 8 chairs, and now we have 5 in-center chairs, or in-home chairs on the in-center floor. Some of the things that we do with patients when there are those barriers, and it took us a while thinking outside the box, listening to other patients. You know, if you have a patient that wants to be solo, if they have an Alexa or a, what's the other one? A Google, they can program that. If they have an issue, they can holler for it to call 911, which is going to get somebody to the house. You can also set those if you want to unlock your door, needing someone to come in. I think that there's just so many resources out there. I can't think of any good reason not to send a patient home. We have talked before about, well, the homeless can't go home, but we have a home therapies manager in Cincinnati that did send a homeless patient out into the community. He had different stops he stayed each week so that he could do his PD. So I don't think there's any reason. We have emergency setup on file with the fire department of each of the locations of where these patients are. Our physicians, you can go to the next slide. Again, we go through this, the in-center is temporary. We also, if we feel like the patient absolutely is a candidate, well, we can do the home visit when we're into their training. If they get a catheter placed in the hospital, we wouldn't have been able to do a home visit ahead of time. We just make sure before the patient goes home from training that we complete those steps. Don't delay home training. We try to figure out and put them wherever we need to so that once the patient makes that decision, then we're going to start them on home. So typically we just got those chairs licensed out on the floor, and we have 5 patients in them, as well as some other patients coming in on second shift. So again, we're going to do that in some of our other areas. I think it's a great way to get it started and start educating the patients on home so they make the best decision for them, which is to go home. Our physicians are wanting us now to take a couple of our patients that are solo, that have been in the program for 4 to 6 months, and start them on nocturnal with a caregiver. And then we're going to come back and reassess. How did that work? Because that's we know that the next best thing to a transplant is somebody that's doing nocturnal dialysis 7 days a week, and they can do it while they're asleep. Trying to think, again, just that the whole culture has to change in your center in order to get everybody on the same page and see that this is the best thing for patients. They also get transplants a lot quicker. More than likely, they're going to get a transplant quicker to somebody in center. You can go to the next slide. So this maybe a couple issues like with non-compliant patients. If you think about some of your non-compliant patients in center, if you really dig deep into it, it could be as simple as the reason they don't come is because they don't want to take the taxi ride. It makes them nervous. It gives them anxiety. So that doesn't mean they're going to be non-compliant at home. You may have a patient that doesn't come faithfully because they've watched somebody die in a chair or, have to do CPR. That's why they're not non-compliant. So I think if we dig deeper and help them through all that, there should be no reason that any patient, I don't think there's a reason that blind patient, deaf, they all deserve it. So that's our philosophy too. We're going to give them a chance, and maybe some of them will fail and some of them will, but then we have a great team of social worker, dietitian. We all do IDT to make sure we can keep them home. And then one more thing, and I'll be quiet. So we also do a pipeline call. We do the pipeline call every 2 weeks. And on that call, we talk about possible starts, patients in center possibly going home. We talk about patients that may have issues. We put them on a little tracker so that we stay constant with who's having problems and what can we do to help them. We also have an HRA tool that I think I talked about the last time we were on a call, which also lets us know when they're starting their membranes failing, dietaries falling off. So all those tools are there. If you use them, I just think we all can be successful to send every patient home.
Thank you, Tracy. I do see 2 questions in here. What is your home therapy retention rate like?
So as far as patients,
First part.
yeah, and I don't have that number in front of me, but typically it's a net gain of patients. We still occasionally lose people back to in-center, but we're still going to keep working with them. Sometimes we just bring them in for respite, and we're able to do some respite with them, and then that gives them time to regroup. And you're still going to have your retention. I mean, if I look at people who are on HHD and said, nope, I can't do it, I need to go back in, that's not too often. So to get you a correct number, I'd have to look into that. But I think keeping them home more outweighs them going back in center by a lot.
Okay. And the second question was, do you have an increase in patient non-adherence?
I think that you do, yeah, but you just have to work on it. And, that's where you can, with our company, we have the Care Team Hub. We can see, we come into work the next morning, we get right in there. We know if somebody didn't do their treatment. We know if they didn't take everything off they should have. So you have to stay on top of those things. And as long as you have that communication, which is another key factor, at least weekly. On Fridays, we do a call to each patient. What's going on? How are you doing? Just so we're touching base. And then when we see things in the Care Team Hub, we also call then so we can be ahead of any issues that might arise.
Michelle,
think it,
this is Vicky. I wanted to kind of jump in and talk with Tracy a little bit about how you got such a fabulous culture. I think the number one barrier, and I know Michelle would agree with this, is it's really kind of overcoming the culture and trying to get everybody to think creatively. I mean, your team is on it. They're just trying every possible thing. Um, and how did you get that much momentum?
So,
And how do you keep it going? It's great.
we have a great team, and I think that culture came from, everybody. The, the area team lead used to be the charge nurse at Dayton North. She pushed she pushed that home. We also, and now we're not to the point we can help too much, but if we have a clinic that's down in or needs help, it's expected that the home therapies help them. So once you get that culture, and there's some people that are just going to have to go, and I hate to say that, but you're going to have those negative people that are not going to think outside the box. If it's not the cherry picked patient, they don't want to train them. So, I mean, did we lose a lot of staff? No, just maybe a couple, but I think, and again, the thing is, we, like, as a team, when our director of operations has his calls weekly with the CMs, he includes home therapies in that. So all of us being involved is what I think is the huge proponent of how we change the culture.
Yeah, and is it your doctor? How much are your doctors? I mean, did you do this and it bubbled up to the doctors, or did it start with the doctors and it bubbled down, or was it just everything at once?
So no, Terry Jacobs is our RVP. She had many conversations with some of the docs. I've had conversations with the docs, and it was a battle at some point. And sometimes they think, well, it's just about the numbers, but it's not. It's not about the numbers. It's what's best for the patient. So that took a little bit, but everybody's on. I mean, all the physicians, the Dayton physicians are on board. They understand it. They see the results from their labs. They see patients doing better. They see more transplants. So it took a little bit, but with those conversations and just not letting up, or doc says, well, they have a CVC, they can't go home. Well, why can't they? They have cats. Why can't they? Probably can't go home. And then you pose those questions back. It's just, again, that helped change the whole culture. And then again, some of these notes, I called Dr. Oxman, who's kind of the lead doctor in the Dayton area, and he added, hospital straight to home, these things, tune them up in the hospital, because he's amazing. He knows it's what's best for the patients. And so the other physicians in his practice and his nurse practitioners have been on board. We also do at least quarterly education. Next Stage meets with them and talks to them about, what's going on with Next Stage. They needed to understand the machine and the prescriptions. There were things that they needed education on, and now that they have that, it's just all falling into place, but it takes a team.
Yeah, I see another question. Did you want to do that, Michelle, in the chat?
sure. Yeah. How do you get the PD catheters in patients at the hospital with the push to discharge the patients as soon as possible?
So the big thing with that is having the nephrologist on board, because one of them's rounding at that hospital when the patient's in there, and then they encourage, or, again, Dr. Oxman's words, drop a temporary CVC, and let's put a PD catheter in them. We get them stable, get some of that fluid off, and then they come out with that PD catheter, or with I say permanent CVC, but it's not permanent, but we put we take the temporary out and put a CVC in, and that's the way to go. You're going to have less hospitalizations. So I think that helps too.
I really think it's incredible what you've been able to do. I mean, it's phenomenal, and the whole idea of the culture and how everybody is on it. One of the other things we hear often, and I don't know how you deal with this, is people are worried about their jobs in the in-center unit. All this push for transplant, all this push for home. So there's a little bit like, well, would there be spots for everybody? And I just wonder, like, in your community, as you're growing home and maybe you're seeing those chairs convert, how have you dealt with, that feeling like we won't have jobs.
Yeah, and I think probably some of them have that, but I think that with communication from, from the team, from our director of operations down, there's going to be a spot for them. If if there will be a spot, we're going to start doing education and get them cross-trained into that home modality. So I don't think I don't hear it a lot, but I know as for Fresenius as a company, what that plan would be is that they want us to cross-train people, because once, we decrease the census in our in-center units, we need more people at home, on the home side to help care for these patients.
So do you allow technicians to work in your home programs? Do they have like functional roles in your home program?
Yes, I have a PCT3 who is, we are so blessed to have him. He's helped us grow our HHD next stage program, and not just him, everybody is instrumental. But yeah, PCTs play a huge part with Fresenius in our home side. LPNs play a huge part with it. So there are a lot of things that they can do that we don't think about until you start writing all the jobs down, and then you can circle. RN doesn't have to do this. I can pass this to the PCT, or I can pass it to the LPN. Our newest thing is we're going to hire care team assistants who can maybe do some environmental visits to the patient's home, check on their supplies, rotate their supplies, come back and say, oh, by the way, it doesn't look like they've done a treatment. They're not doing their regular treatments. So I think there's a lot of things that can be, anyone can do in home, even with whatever type of license that they have.
I'm going to stop hogging the questions because there's questions rolling in, Michelle. Looks like there's a lot in the chat.
How do the patients get dialysis while training for PD if they don't have a CVC?
So that we would do an urgent start. So they come in 5 days a week, and we're going to lay them flat. And they would first, we need to make sure that we can fill them. So for the first several days, we will be laying them flat, filling them up. We don't fill full capacity, usually like about 500 to 1,000 in, and then they have to stay that way. And that takes, I don't know, probably by the second week is when we truly could be training them, but they're still getting dialysis. They're back there doing their dialysis. We're just doing it for them while they're laying flat.
Right. And then when they feel a little bit better, you start training little by little.
Yes, we use iPads for both PD and HHD. So we have iPads that we do our training with. So yeah. And that's a huge thing that I think it's been talked about for a while. Don't forget about emergent starts, because you can do it. They're just going to be in a room laying flat. And so if you have the room to do that, I think you could get a lot more patients home as well with that.
How many staff on your PD and home programs?
It just depends. So the program at Dayton North, we have 88 patients. So I have 3.5 training nurses, and I also have 2 nursing home programs. So I'm not putting them in this mix. So I have 3.5 nurses that train. I have a case manager, and then the other half of the 3.5, she case manages the other half as well. Out on the floor, we typically have 5 HHD trains going at the same time. So I have an RN out there, and then 1 or 2 PCTs. So, the RN, gives the first, she does the education, and then that PCT can do so much. They can reinforce so many things, and, they can do troubleshooting with the machine. So they're just valuable. I think that everyone should, if you don't, think about having LPNs or PCTs on your home team.
Okay. How often do you see patients that are coming from the hospital with implanted PD catheters that are unable to complete training and have to take out the PD catheter?
Occasionally you have them. To have a number for you right now, I don't have that, but you do have some. But I will tell you, the most common reason of why it's not working is they're not pooping. They need some type of laxative, something to be given to them, a stool softener. that's the biggest reason. But again, sometimes you'll have them where they coil back up. But is it a common thing? No, but we still have some, but then they have to go back and reposition it. But it's not a huge barrier to get them trained. We also, I just like to brag about my team. But Dayton, I'm sorry. We are taking, which is so exciting, we're taking a trach LVAD patient at home. So that's something, I mean, there's a process with our clinical services. A lot of times you would never be able to get a physician on board with a trach that is not capped. So this trach is not capped LVAD, and we're going to be training his wife to do HHD in his house. So I just think that's exciting.
There was a question here, Tracy, about people really feel better if somebody like comes to their home to make sure their home is safe, and how you've kind of gotten over that. You know, before you said you started people without maybe seeing their home, so there seems like they're wondering, how do you get people who are worried about how their home will be?
So we still are going to do a visit before we set them up at home. We will still see them, but we don't want that to stop getting them trained, because I think as the cultures changed, before it was too easy to make the home visit first and decide, well, this house isn't suitable. But once they already have the PD catheter, staff try a little bit harder to think outside the box, and there's always a way to make it work. But to just send them home, we don't do that. We're going to check it and make sure we get everything in place, whether that be, you know, we need to bring the social worker in to clean some things, whatever we need to do, we'll do. But we don't send them home without having eyes on their home. It doesn't come before we start training sometimes. A lot of times it does, but there are times that it doesn't.
There's a question about when you converted your in-center chairs for use as HHD training, what steps did you need to take for that approval?
So you have to send a letter to ODH, and you have to let them know what you want to do. And then you have to set up, once you know you're getting into the process, you have to set those chairs up as if they're training. So with all the 5, we had to have 5 next stage machines, you know, the chair for them to be in, a chair for their care partner. You just make it look like it's ready to go as you get the patients. It's really not a difficult step. They want a current fire marshal report. I think the fee is like $150. But it's not too hard. And then they come out and it was really simple. They go out and look at it. That's what they're wanting to see. They want to make sure it's set up to train, to make sure you have the square feet that you need, because you need to have, 120 square feet for each chair. It's different than what it is in center. I think you only have to have 80 around a chair in center, but it's 120 in a home. So yeah, it's not too scary of a process.
All right, are there any more questions from the group? Perfect. There was one question that asked if you'd be willing to share your contact information, maybe just like an email, possibly, if anyone has questions in the future. Do you have access to the chat? Are you able to put that in the chat?
Yes, I can put it. Yep, I'll put it in there right now.
Wonderful. Dawn, if you could put yours in as well, if anyone has questions about transplant, that would be really, really helpful. Wonderful. So I think that concludes our call. Thank you all for joining us today. I think that we learned wonderful information that can be utilized at the centers to increase home and transplant. If there are any other questions that come in, we'll be on for at least another minute, but you're more than welcome to log out of the call. There is going to be a post-webinar survey. If you can answer the questions about how you enjoyed the call today and we'll be looking forward to the next one in a couple of months. Thank you all for joining.